mostly about how you can use freely available, in some cases open source tools to troubleshoot problems with DNS and with DNSSEC in particular. And these are issues that will come up with your own, perhaps, domain or other domains that people are trying to resolve in your infrastructure. In typical fashion, I don't know why the slide didn't come through here, but it says what this is not about. I like to do that with, it's like this old interop tutorials where they would say what this workshop is not about. We're not going to talk about DNS per se. Most of the basic concepts of DNS I assume that you're familiar with. And we're not going to talk about how to sign your zones or how to validate. We're not going to talk about whether DNSSEC is a good idea or not. It's here, it's being used, and it is in place in all of the major TLDs. So it has an impact on you if you are validating, or even if you're not validating in some cases. It will have an impact on what you're doing and how you troubleshoot problems. So there are a lot of instances where we run into problems with DNS where we find that there are rather weird problems. Like sometimes a domain will resolve elsewhere, but it won't resolve on our name servers. Name servers that we have to support and the users that we have to support. That problem seems to happen a lot. And so there are a lot of good reasons why we're here. How many folks have had to troubleshoot basic DNS problems as part of their day-to-day jobs? Pretty much everyone. How many folks have had to troubleshoot actual DNSSEC problems so far as part of their jobs? Fewer number of people, but we do have a few people out there who've had to do it. In some cases, you may have had to troubleshoot a DNSSEC problem. It didn't seem very apparent there was a DNSSEC problem at the time, but it might have been. Some of the problems we're going to go through are actually situations that you can run into even when you're not validating DNSSEC, but they're caused by DNSSEC, or they're caused by assignment zones interacting with some other misconfigurations. So why am I interested in DIG? Partly because somebody asked me to do a tutorial at Manon that talked about how to troubleshoot DNS, particularly using DIG. And the reason they asked that question and gave me that suggestion is because DIG kind of forms the language that DNS gurus and even not so guruific DNS people speak when they talk about DNS problems. When you see stuff on mailing lists, when you see people exchanging information as an attempt to troubleshoot a problem, they are often using DIG output. So it really helps to understand what DIG is doing, what output it's giving you, and what it's trying to tell you. And I specifically said that this is stuff you can't do with nslookup. I mean, we could have talked all day about all the stuff you can't do with nslookup. One of the reasons that I specifically wanted to call out nslookup here is not only is it very old, but it's commonly used by maybe people who aren't as knowledgeable about DNS, maybe not even knowledgeable about networking. They use that to try to report DNS problems. And nslookup really doesn't give you very much good information. It might as well not have said anything. Or you might as well just have said, hey, this domain's having a problem, we'll figure out what it is. And to give you an example, this is actual nslookup output from a query that I made, copied and pasted into the slide. Okay? What I did here is I queried a name server that actually is running a DNS server on port 53. Can everyone see that? Actually, it's running a DNS server on port 53, and I asked for a domain. And the domain I asked for was cisco.com. And at the very bottom, you can see it comes back and it says the server can't find cisco.com, and then it says NX domain. Okay, that's really interesting. NX domain is a particular response code that indicates that the entire domain name doesn't exist. So what it's really saying is cisco.com doesn't exist at all. That's what nslookup is trying to tell you. So when you go to Beer and Gear, go up to the Cisco booth and tell them, hey, I heard you guys are shutting down, going out of business because your domain name's gone. And see what they say. They probably wouldn't agree with that. So let's see what's really happening, and DIG will actually tell us what's really happening. We do the same query with DIG, and you can see the query that I made in nslookup, now I'm doing with DIG. At the very top is the actual command line that I typed in, and then you can see there's the response that it gives. Look at where it says status. I'm going to circle some of these. It says refused. Okay, that's very different from NX domain. What it's saying is that the server, adns1.berkeley.edu, is telling us to go take a hike. It's not saying that cisco.com doesn't exist. It's saying, I'm not going to answer that query for you. It also says, there's a warning that dig gives that says the recursion is requested but not available. Okay, what that means is that I have asked for the name server to do recursion, and it is not willing to do that for me. Now remember, there are two major functions in name servers. There's the authoritative function, which is where you have authoritative data for a particular set of domains, and you hand out that data because you already know it. The recursive function is you don't know anything about any domain, and you go and recursively look at different name servers to find information about that domain so you can return it to the client. It is now a best practice, and has been for some time, that you separate those functions so that authoritative name servers do not answer recursion, do not do recursion, and recursive name servers do not try to provide authority for any particular domain. So what we see here is a case where we are actually asking an authoritative name server to give us a piece of information that requires recursion, and it is not doing it, and it's specifically refusing to do it. Servers may give other indications when they are authoritative and they're being asked to do recursion, but you see the big issue right there. The warning that it's giving you is that you've asked it to do recursion and it doesn't want to do it. You can also see the same thing happening in the flags. Dig shows you DNS response flags. So the flag that you see there in the DNS response is QR, which is query response, and RD, which is recursion desired. Now I actually flagged recursion desired in the query that I made, and the server is simply copying that back and sending it to me saying, you sent me a query that required recursion, desired recursion, and I'm not going to give it to you. So what are the flags that Dig is trying to tell us about? I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the original ones from RFC 1035. This is the DNS message header, and you can see that the first part is a 16-bit query ID. The query ID is sent out, it's chosen, nowadays it's chosen completely random, and the response ID must match the query ID so that you know you're getting a response to the query that you actually asked. And that's both a sanity feature, sanity check, and it's also a minor security feature as well. And then you see a bunch of flags below that, and things like opcodes and rcodes. So we'll talk a little bit about what those flags are and what opcodes and rcodes mean. This is a quick little reference of the flags. So you can see in one particular case where I set the RD flag on a query, recursion desired. If the name server is willing to do recursion, it will also set the RA flag, recursion available. So that means you wanted me to do recursion, and I'm doing recursion for you. There are a few other bits that we'll look at. Truncated we'll look at a little bit later. Now, in terms of the status output, that comes from the rcode. Rcodes may have various statuses, various settings, and the one that you'll mostly want to get most of the time is no error, which simply means there was no error. The query was returned properly. Now, it may not mean that there's actually an answer to your query. For example, you may ask for the MX record of a domain, and it may not have an MX record. You will get a no error response back with a blank answer section, basically saying there's no answer to what you're asking. But it's different from NX domain. If you ask for the NS record of domain where the entire domain doesn't exist, not just the MX record, the entire domain doesn't exist, then you'll get the NX domain. We're going to see that crop up in a couple of troubleshooting scenarios that we look at over time. There are a few others. I do a whole slide on serve fail a little bit later. That's going to be one of the more common ones we're going to see, especially in troubleshooting. And then we already saw refused. Okay, so very quick exercise just to figure out if the name server is answering authoritatively for a zone. We're going to actually use dig, and I will actually play along here too. I have a little window here, and I'm going to ask for berkeley.edu. Now, when I don't type a query type in dig, and I'll have another slide that shows the query types, it automatically assumes that I want the A record. So that's going to be the one it's going to choose. And then I use the @ sign to pick a particular name server, and it'll be ads1.berkeley.edu. And I can't type and talk at the same time. Okay, so it's given us a fair amount of output here. This is a lot more than what nslookup gives us. Now, there are a couple things to note. First of all, the AA bit is set. Okay, that flag, as you saw in the previous slide, means authoritative answer. That means that the name server is authoritative for that zone and it is answering authoritatively. So you're getting authoritative data from the name server. There's also another interesting thing. If you look down here, you can see the TTLs of all the records. This is the time to live. In a caching recursive name server, this tells the server how long to keep the record in its cache, when it should age it out and expire from its cache. If you keep asking an authoritative name server the same question over and over again, notice how those numbers don't change. They stay the same. Okay? So that's one of the ways in which we know that we're talking to an authoritative name server, other than the fact that it's also giving us the AA bit. Now here's a little trick. Go upstairs when you go back to your room. Go upstairs and plug in your laptop and use the hotel wireless. Do the same thing that we're doing now. And see what response it gives you. It's going to give you a very different response. And this is another thing that Dig tells you that's very interesting. In fact, do the same query over and over again. You're going to see a bunch of different responses that don't seem to match each other, except for the fact that the A record is the same. The hotel wireless is hijacking our DNS queries, even if we specify a particular DNS server. Hotel wireless is actually hijacking our DNS queries, which also means that DNSSEC validation on the hotel wireless, if you've got your own validating name server on your laptop, isn't going to work, or may not work in some cases. So that's one of those things that if you use Dig enough and you're just playing around, as I was yesterday evening on the hotel wireless, I quickly saw that our DNS queries are being hijacked. So it's one of the many things you can find out with Dig. If you don't want all this output, there are a couple Dig flags which I'll just introduce you to. There's the short flag. That's really short. That just gives you the answer to the question you're asking. It's useful in setting variables and scripts and things like that. You can just sort of backtick dig plus short and whatever query you're looking for, and it'll put the IP address right into the variable. So it's a little bit easier for things like that. You can also display some of the sections and not all of the sections. One possibility is to do no all. Okay? And when you do that, it doesn't present you with anything. It does the query, it doesn't show you anything. So the point is that you actually do know all, and then you add things. So maybe I just want to see the authority section. So I just do plus authority, and it shows me the authority section. I can put know all, and then plus answer, plus authority, plus additional, and that'll give me just about all the sections that I had before, except it won't show the comments. You can also negate stuff. So I could, instead of doing know all, I could actually do no authority, and erase the know all flag here. And now it gives me the answer section and the additional section, but not the authority section. So there's a lot of different ways you can manipulate Dig's output. Most of the options you'll use with Dig that affect the output behavior and also the behavior of the queries that Dig is making have a plus in front of them. There are some options to Dig that have minus in front of them, like the typical Unix command line, and some of those affect the actual behavior of Dig itself. We'll mostly be looking at the plus stuff. Okay? So, what I'm going to do right now, I'm skipping ahead some slides, but we'll go back and look at them. I'm going to, instead of looking at adns1.berkeley.edu, I'm just going to leave this blank, which means it's going to go to the default resolver that's specified in my configuration, either given to me by DHCP or if I'm overriding DHCP, it'll use the default resolver. And here you can see it's giving me, so some people have probably already queried this, but you can see it's giving me different numbers here, the TTL numbers, and they keep changing. They're actually counting down. So eventually that number, one of those numbers will count down to 0, and the server will have to look up the name again. The recursive server will look up the name again. You can see the server we're using right down here where it says server. Very convenient. And I have some slides that show some of the other flags that you're seeing. So we already went through this. We already went through the short output. And this shows you the same output with the no additional flag set. And there are a couple other things I want to draw your attention to. You can see there's the ID of the query. That's the 16-bit integer that sets the query ID. That's useful if you are also sniffing a wire at the same time you're doing this dig, because then you'll see that query ID as you're sniffing the wire. You also see that the AA flag is set. You can see the query time. That's the round trip time to actually make the query. It's very useful to have that information because then you can tell if the name server is working well or not. And sometimes there's some latency when you actually type the dig command, especially if you're typing a specific name server to go to, because your own version of dig has to look up the IP address of that name server that you're going to and then make a query to that name server. That process may take longer than normal. So what you want to see is what's the latency of the actual query, the round trip latency of that query going out and coming back. That gives you information about how loaded down the name server is or whether there's some misconfiguration that's causing it to take a really long time to respond. And finally, message size is going to be very important going forward because in DNSSEC, the message sizes get very large. And that has implications for resolution and firewalls and TCP versus UDP and all that stuff. Okay, so the one other thing we can throw into this exercise is to do the no recurse flag, which tells the name server not to do recursion for a particular name. That's useful if you're trying to do certain types of queries where the name server is both authoritative and being recursive at the same time, or it's also useful if you just want to get rid of that warning that says recursion requested but not available. Basic overview on querying different things with dig, different types of records. Very simple, you just put everything on the command line and it does it all at once. You don't have to type in, interactively type in set query equals blah, blah, blah. It's a lot easier if you're used to a command line type interface, a lot easier than nslookup in that respect. And you can also do things in different order. Dig is very smart about figuring out what you're actually trying to do, regardless of the actual order you type the different bits and pieces of the query in. And I say try dig any Berkeley EDU. You're going to get a lot of output from that. You can try that while we're talking. But if you try it on different servers, you're also going to get different results. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is later on. So we're going to do a very basic troubleshooting scenario here. And I'm going to let you do, I think, most of the work. You have a case where a user is reporting that they can't resolve a particular domain on your server, your recursive name server at your ISP or your organization on your campus, but they can resolve it at home. So it must be your fault. And it's important to understand what's really going on here, because often in these cases, it's not the recursive name server's fault. It's actually someone else's fault. And it's always important, even more than finding cause, it's much more important to assign blame, I believe. So that's something you're going to want to do. And dig is going to help you out. Now, one of the things to do when you have these sorts of issues is, oftentimes what happens is that there are mismatches in authority records. And usually the first thing you want to start looking at is, okay, who is supposed to be answering authoritatively for this domain? So the way you do that is you're going to trace the chain of delegation from the root name servers on down. So I've picked one of the root name servers here. And while I'm talking about this, why don't you go ahead and start doing this? I'm not actually going to do this, so go ahead and do it. Now some of you may know of a shortcut. Do this instead. Don't do the shortcut just yet. We'll go over the shortcut in just a minute. But what we do is we're looking for the name servers for this particular domain, and we start at the root, and we move on down. Now, if you don't know what the root servers are, you don't know in your head that rootservers.net is one of the root servers. I know that at least some people in this room do, because there are people in this room who actually run the froot server. So they actually know about that being a root server. But if you don't, you just type dig on the command line with no options, and it'll give you the root servers. If for some reason it doesn't, just dig ns dot on the command line will also give you the root servers. So we see that it's delegating COM down to the GTLD servers. So we'll query one of the GTLD servers, and then we query the server that is actually, one of the servers that's actually authoritative for radiofreebeer.com, and that is tinkerdork.org, just like Tinkerbell with a dork instead of a bell. But this is, obviously these are lots of test domains that are being used as throwaways, so that's why they have silly names. Okay, when we ask the authoritative server for Radio Free Beer, what do we get? What's going on here? Does anyone see the problem? Do the servers that you get when you do dig ns radiofreebeer.com at d.gtld servers, do they match the ones when you do the same query at tinkerdork.org? Anyone want to venture an answer to that? Has anyone been able to get through and do all these queries yet? So what we'll do is we'll do some of them real quick. Okay, so it gives us 2 authoritative servers. And we're going to use this one, because that's in the example. And we'll use... Okay, it gives us different servers. Now keep in mind, com is the parent zone of radiofreebeer.com. It's delegating to a set of name servers, and then there's another set of name servers that's located in the zone file for radiofreebeer.com. Those should match. Sometimes they don't, and it's not consequential, but sometimes it is consequential. Why do you think it's consequential in this particular case? Look at the addresses that are being returned for those 2 servers. They're completely bogus. That's not going to work. Okay? But here's an interesting question. Why does it work at all? I have a couple different windows that should be able to get to that. We'll just do this one here. My windows all disappeared on me, so. Okay, so we're going to dig for a host that I know is in that zone. And I'm going to use a local name server that's not doing DNSSEC validation. There's a reason for that, which I'll talk about later. Okay, cool. It comes up with an address. Now that address is also bogus, but let's just pretend that's a good address. It's one that I want. And then it shows me the name servers again, which are in fact bogus. So now I'm going to go ask for another host in the same zone that I know exists, host 2, and I get a serve fail. Okay, so what's happening here? What's happening is that the recursive name server is following the chain of delegation from the root all the way on down. So when it asks the com servers, what are the servers for this domain, the com servers tell them, and it goes to the new servers, tinkertorch.org as an example, and it pulls the information down. Tinkertorch.org gives it authoritative information. But then it says, hey, and by the way, these are the real name servers for this domain. So then the server, the recursive server, puts those name server information into its cache and replaces what was given to it by the GTLD servers. It has effectively just poisoned its own cache. Not through any maliciousness, but because of incompetence on the part of the person who's running radiofreebeer.com. Now, the other interesting thing is I'm going to go back and query the exact same name server now for host 1. Oh, and it still works. There should have been a timeout there that would have caused the serve fail. You'll sometimes get that. What happens is that the TTL for host 1 here is only 10 seconds long. And the TTL for the name servers is much longer. So as a result, at some point during my talking, some of those names may disappear from the cache and they may not be looked up again. And there you can see where I do host 1. Once again, I get a serve fail, even though it just worked a couple minutes ago. Or really a little more than 10 seconds ago. Oftentimes you have this case where you have a host that has a lower TTL than the name servers. And you have name servers that get put in that are wrong. Now why would the name servers be wrong? Well, it turns out a lot of times people change their hosting providers. When they change their hosting providers, they change the DNS servers that are with the hosting providers. And the old hosting provider shuts off the DNS server or does something with it that it can no longer answer the queries. The person changing the hosting provider sets the new name servers in their registrar, in the whois information, which means that the GTLD name servers then get properly populated. But they don't change the records in their own zone files. They simply copy the zone file from the old server to the new server. So the new server keeps referring back to the old servers, which aren't answering for the zone anymore. This happens all the time. People do this all the time. Sometimes it's even worse. It's harder. This is such an obvious example that we can troubleshoot it very easily. But sometimes it's a lot harder because what ends up happening is the old server still works. It just has old information. So eventually the website moves or something else moves, and then some people get old information if they cache the name servers and effectively poison their cache. And some people get the new information. So you get these really weird situations, and it all comes from having this authority mismatch. Authority mismatches don't always cause problems, but they often do. So it gives you a good way of saying, okay, here's where I need to start troubleshooting. Another way to do it is to use, this is the shortcut I was talking about. If you do dig plus trace, not trace, but trace, NS, okay, again, querying the same name server, going to do dig plus trace. Okay, what it does is all the work we just did in that previous slide automatically. So it's a much faster way to do what we were doing before. It shows you all the authority records for each server as you go down the chain. What's important is that if you have a problem with the zone and these two sets of things are not the same, they should be the same. If they're not the same, then you know that's a good place to start looking. Are these servers on the bottom giving you the same answer as the servers on the top? Are the servers on the bottom even working? Dig gives you the information that you need to start going, and then you can start using dig again and figure out what's going on. Okay, I've been able to troubleshoot so many problems using this method. They just seem to happen all the time, so this is a very common problem. Now, of course, it doesn't really involve DNSSEC. We're going to start getting into that soon. We saw a couple of serve fails already happening. And I want to do a little sidebar on some of the possibilities that could be happening when you get a serve fail. It could be that you're asking an authoritative server for a record that it's not actually authoritative for, and it's not going to do recursion for you. Remember the other server we saw gave a refused, but sometimes authoritative servers will give a serve fail instead. Sometimes they'll do it because they're terribly misconfigured. Sometimes they'll do it because the zone they're trying to look up is misconfigured, as we saw last time. And finally, they'll often do it because if they're doing DNSSEC validation and the zone is bogus, or records in the zone are bogus. We'll talk about what bogus means, but essentially it means they tried to validate and it validated wrong. Then you'll get a serve fail as well. So it's important to refer back to that slide at some point to try to figure out what kinds of things we're getting when we get serve fails. In this slide, I actually explained what I've already explained, so we'll go beyond that. You can use that for reference once the slides are posted. And these are also the shortcuts. I also put something else. This isn't as much of a useful thing for this particular time around, but sometimes you get intermittent problems, and it's because one of the name servers isn't getting updated information. So if you do that dig plus NS search on a domain, it will query all the name servers that are authoritative for that domain for their SOA records. So you want to see if their SOA records, particularly the serial numbers, match. That'll tell you whether you're actually getting correct information from all the servers. Okay, so we have another problem that comes up now. The next problem that comes up is that you have a departmental server and they're getting occasional timeouts. They have a server that's doing some sort of update process and they're not really sure what it's doing. They don't know what query it's making, but it seems to be getting DNS timeouts. So the main thing to do here is to sniff the wire. Now, this is mostly a dig troubleshooting exercise, so why are we sniffing the wire? Dig doesn't actually sniff the wire. Well, understanding how dig works, understanding the language that dig presents to you is actually really important for some of the tools you can use to sniff the wire and look at DNS queries on the wire. Now we can use just plain old TCP dump, and that will work. We can also use Wireshark or T-Shark, And I'm actually going to skip over that and not do that. But that'll give you some information as well. But there are some basic tools that are DNS oriented, like dnscap and nmsg. Those tools will actually be able to help us troubleshoot this particular problem. So what I'm going to do, and my windows all went away, so I'm going to have to log back in as soon as my computer stops spazzing out. To log back in here. Oops. This is just a little server that I'm running at home. This is on my home network. And I'm going to become root on this so I can sniff the wire. Log into the same one. Okay, so now we're going to run TCP down. We'll use the N flag so that we try to look up, because this is all this stuff's going to be RFC 1918 address. So we'll try to look up DNS addresses with TCP down. And we'll look for port 53. And then, because it's a server, we don't really know what it's trying to do. I have a little shell that makes a query, but you can't see what it's doing, so we're just going to have to run query.sh. Okay, so let's look at what it's doing here. It asks, this is the client, 1052.52.8, and then 1052.53.2 is the server. It's asking the server for any for Microsoft.com. Okay, and then the server starts to respond, and then all of a sudden you see it do a TCP connection here. Well, that's kind of interesting. Most people think that TCP is, and it's still TCP port 53, most people think that's only for zone transfers. So is the client trying to do a zone transfer from the server? What's going on here? We can see a little bit more if we do TCP.-b. That gives us a little bit more information. Maybe not quite as much for us to really be able to understand what's going on. We run it again, and there you can see, gives you a little bit more information about the packets and whether the checksums are correct and whether the DF bit is set in the flag. I'm going to use a different tool now, though, called dnscap. And because I want to see what's going on in that TCP connection, I'm going to use the -T that tells dnscap to look for both UDP and TCP responses. And then I'm going to use the -G that tells it to display it to the standard output, display what it gets. Now I'm going to run the query again. Okay, now we get a lot of information here. This is what's really interesting though. When the first query comes back, it's in UDP. And it has the TC bit set. Okay, so there you can see dnscap is showing us the flags the same way that dig would. So this is why it's important to understand what those flags are. If you can read dig output, then you can read the dnscap output. If the TC bit is set, then that means you must fall over to TCP to do the rest of the query. Now, why is the TC bit set? The TC bit is set in this case because any query that exceeds 512 bytes has to be truncated. And when you truncate it at the last complete record. So you don't just stop in the middle of a record, like you just micro and then stop right there. You actually do the last complete record you can do, then you truncate the packet and you send the TC. You truncate the message, I should say, and you set the TC bit. That tells the client to fall over to TCP. Now when it goes to TCP, it gets everything that it's supposed to get here. And I'm going to do one more tool, which gives us an even more interesting dig-like output. Let me see if I remember the syntax here. This tDNSQR gives us it's a plugin for nmsg tool, which is Microsoft's ISC. And it gives us an output that looks a lot like dig. So if I run the query again, Okay? It's not picking up what's in TCP, but it does pick up the UDP portion of the query. And look at the output it gives us right here. It looks just like dig output. So again, understanding dig output actually helps when you're using some of the more advanced tools for sniffing DNS packets on the wire. And again, you can see that the TC bit is set here. So this packet's been truncated and it's gone over to TCP. Now, why are there intermittent problems? Well, you can think pretty quickly about why there might be intermittent problems with this. If the server has a bunch of different name servers that it's querying, and one of them is blocking TCP queries, you can very quickly see how that would cause a problem for this particular server. And in fact, if I do a dig command to a different server, let's go back to running TCP dump here. I'm going to dig any Microsoft.com. I'm going to use a different server. Somewhere between the path of this server and my client, TCP is being blocked. Okay, so dig tells me that it's truncated and it's retrying in TCP mode, but then nothing happens. If I look over at what's happening here in TCP dump, I can actually see that it makes the query for Microsoft. It starts to give some stuff back, and then it starts to make a TCP connection. In this particular case, the server responds with a SYN-ACK, and then the client ignores it. So somewhere in between the server and the client, there's a firewall that's blocking TCP. I can infer that from this type of connection. And here you can see eventually dig gives up, and it says, timed out, I couldn't reach the server. Now, in the case that I'm doing right here, Microsoft.com, if I do dig any Microsoft.com at a server that does work, I see that the message size is 727. So again, we're dealing with something that's higher than 512 bytes. That means that dig must revert to TCP in order to do in order to get the information that it needs. There's another standard that came about in 1999 called EDNS, and that allows for DNS messages to be higher than 512 bytes up to 64K bytes. Dig can be used to make EDNS queries by specifying the buff size and a number. So I'm going to do buff size 1024. That should fit that 727 byte query unit. And when you look at what happens, because I'm not sniffing the entire connection here, I'm only sniffing the first 64 bytes, it can't see the whole thing. But if I do S0 and -V again, and then run that query again, you can see that it's just a couple of packets. Now it's actually missing some, actually it's not missing anything here. Just a UDP query and a UDP packet. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do any for something that is DNSSEC signed, so you can see the difference that DNSSEC makes. We'll take out the buff size now. We'll do Berkeley EDU because it's everyone's favorite domain. And here you can see when you get 2,972 bytes. Now this particular version of dig is still using TCP because I'm not actually asking for DNSSEC records per se. I'm just using a regular dig query for any. The any query response is going to give you lots of DNSSEC records because what any asks for is all the records that you know about for this particular domain. If you have DNSSEC records in your cache, then give them to me. Or if you're authoritative and you have DNSSEC records, give them to me. So you're seeing a whole bunch of stuff for Berkeley EDU, including several RR signatures, which are DNSSEC signatures. And here you can see a case where you're actually getting a TCP connection started. Now we'll see what happens if we set the buff size to 4096. Okay. So if I go back up to the top here, it did EDNS. It actually will give us information saying, yeah, it's doing EDNS and it's setting the buffer to 4096. It gives us an answer that looks good. The actual message size sometimes changes. What you see here, though, is a case where you still only see 2 UDP packets. Okay, and the reason for that is that you have to use fragmented UDP packets in order to get a message size that's that large. Because we've exceeded with that 2983 byte response, we've exceeded the 1500 byte NTU of Ethernet. So you're not going to see that with plain old TCP down at port 53 because the fragments don't have a port of 53. If I just do TCP dump UDP instead, I don't filter as nicely, but it does capture the packets. You actually see the extra packets here that come through. Now, and you also see lots of other UDP packets, as you can see. DNSCap actually has a way of doing that where it can get the UDP packets and put them all together pretty nicely. So we have a pretty good idea from this particular example that we've got a firewall problem that's blocking large responses. And that's going to happen a lot, even without DNSSEC, but especially with DNSSEC. It's going to be one of the things you're going to have to troubleshoot a lot when you see more and more zones getting signed. And you do not have to be validating DNSSEC to run into this problem. All that has to be happening is that the server is going to give you DNSSEC records. And that often happens even when you're not validating DNSSEC. I want to make a comment about nmsg and message tool, the tool that we use to do that sniffing that actually presented us with information that looked like it was from DIG. That's very useful for a troubleshooting purpose. nmsg is also used to submit data to ISC's Security Information Exchange. Is that right? Yeah. And that is a passive DNS repository. Passive DNS can also be used to troubleshoot DNS problems and DNSSEC problems. And it's also obviously very useful for security purposes. So you might want to check out if you're interested in providing data to ISC for the SIE project. Check out the URL that's there. There's also a blog entry that I refer to at the end of the slides. That's actually really worth doing because it also gives you access to some of the data that you can look at, and you can see if domains have changed over time. You can see possibly what kinds of things might have been done to domains and make them more or less resolvable over time. So SIE itself can be a troubleshooting tool, just as the tool that's used for it, nmsg, is a useful troubleshooting tool. Okay, so I basically did everything on the next few slides. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what DNSSEC records actually look like when we query for them. In this particular case, I've queried for the DNS keys of Berkeley EDU. These are the keys that are used to sign the zone. Now what we see here are the public keys. When you sign a DNSSEC zone, you're actually using your private key to do the signing. The public keys are available to other servers to look at so they can actually decrypt the hash and then match it against the hash that they do to make sure that the signatures match. There's another way that DIG allows you to more easily see key information. If you use the multi-line output with the plus multi, and you can see I also chose no all and then plus answer because all I wanted to see was the answer of this and not all the authority information. That way I could fit it on one slide. It gives you a nice, neat multi-line output of the key information, and it also gives you the key ID, which is going to be very important. Because you want to know if you see signatures, they will contain the key ID of the key that was used to sign them. So you will know if there is a difference in the key that's being used to sign a record or versus the key that's actually in DNS. In addition, parent zones, in order to maintain a chain of trust in DNSSEC, must use DS records. Those are called delegation signer records. They're almost like the DNSSEC equivalent of NS records. The DS record has to match the key. It's a hash, and it has to be a hash of what's commonly called the key signing key in the child zone. So the parent has a hash of the key that's in the child zone that's used to sign some of the records. If those keys are mismatched, then you could get DNSSEC problems. So it's useful to be able to look up the keys of a particular domain and figure out what the key IDs are pretty quickly. And DIG lets you do that using these options. Okay, what are some of the other things that we see in those fields? You saw a 256 or 257 here, right over here. 256, 257. That determines whether the key has its secure entry point bit set or not. Now, the standard only specifies whether the secure entry point is set. We commonly, in the operations community, refer to that as either being a ZSK, a zone signing key, or a KSK, a key signing key. A ZSK is used to sign all the records in the zone. The KSK, or key signing key, signs the 2 DNS keys, or the minimum 2 DNS keys. It'll sign all the DNS keys if there are more than 2. So it'll sign the KSK, it'll sign itself, and it will also sign the ZSK. You then take a hash of the KSK and you put that in the DS record in the parent zone up above. So that hash has to match the KSK. Again, why it's useful to have the key ID. In addition, you also see flags like 3, that's the protocol, which means that it's DNS set, and the algorithm in this case is 10. 10 is RSA SHA-512. There could also be 8, which is RSA SHA-256. You commonly see 5, which is RSA SHA-1, etc., etc. And then we see RR SIGs here. Now, these are the RR SIGs of a particular domain name. dns1.berkeley.edu is one of the name servers. It has a quad A record and an A record. Both of those signatures are there. You don't actually see the quad A or the A records. I only pasted in the signatures. Right here, you can see the key that was used to sign that particular record. So when we go back to the keys here, oops, I pushed the wrong button. When we go back to the keys here, you can actually see it was this key, 42697, which is the ZSK. That actually makes some sense. 42697 is what signed these records. So we see the signatures matching the key that's in at the top of the DNS zone, which we would actually expect. Now, it also gives us these big blobs of date information. You can see this is pretty old. I did these slides a while ago. The first line is when the signature expired, or will have expired, or should expire, which is 2011, 4/15, so April 15th. Yeah, April 15th is when the signature expired. And the signature was valid from March 11th. So the signatures in this particular domain are valid for 34 days. That's called the validity interval. It's the time between when the signature is valid, which is usually right when it's signed, and the time when it expires. The other type of record that we need to look at is the NSEC record, which is used to prove non-existence. What it does is it says, here is the record we're talking about. This is the record in question. Here's the next record in canonical order. And I have an A and a quad A record, plus the RR SIG and the NSEC record. So there are 4 records for this particular domain, and no more. And then the next one is this adns2.berkeley.edu. So not only are there no more than 4 records for this domain name, there's nothing between it. There's no other domain name. There's no adns1aa.berkeley.edu. So I can prove non-existence between that record and the records that it has, and anything in between it and the next record. That way, if somebody filters out the quad A record, I'll know that they've done it, because I know there's supposed to be a quad A record. If I ask for a quad A record and I don't get it, it says, no, it's not there, I'll want to see the NSEC record. And when I see that there's actually supposed to be a quad A record there, then I'll fail the validation. So NSEC is very useful in proving non-existence of particular records or particular domains, as the case may be. Oops. Sorry for making everyone dizzy. Okay, I already talked about doing any query on a domain that's DNSSEC signed. You will get all those DNSSEC records, so it'll be quite a long response. If you want a validating name server to give you DNSSEC records and perform validation and tell you whether the validation succeeded or not, you use the plus DNSSEC flag. Okay, so I have a couple of validating name servers that you can try this against. And one of them is on the next slide, or on a subsequent slide, but they are SNS for Secure Name Server, and one is tinkerdort.org. Okay, we already played around with that domain. The other one is sns.burnttofu.net. Okay, burnt tofu is one word, just like you think, it's tofu that you burn. Burnttofu.net. So sns.burnttofu.net or sns.tinkerdort.org. Both of those will give you, they will attempt to do validation. They use both the ISC DLV and they also have keys for the root name server. So anything that has a delegation of trust from the root will be able to do validation. The burnt tofu one is actually running on this laptop right now. So I think I've got it all set up so that it should be able to allow queries, but maybe not. Otherwise, hopefully one of them will work. This is just a reminder that when you have large DNSSEC responses, you cannot block TCP port 53, and you cannot block UDP fragments. You will break DNSSEC if you do that. You will break any domain that has a lot of stuff in it. Okay, a lot of domains now have DKIM signatures, domain key signatures. Those signatures are not part of DNSSEC, but they take up a lot of space. And so when you start looking for those names, you start looking for queries, you're going to have large responses. So you cannot be blocking this stuff. In addition, there are some firewalls out there. Brand C used to make a whole bunch of them that by default did DNS inspection. And if the message was longer than 512 bytes, didn't matter whether TCP was allowed or not, didn't matter whether they allowed UDP fragments, the message was larger than 512 bytes, it dropped the DNS packet. Okay, you have to turn that off. Most people have probably figured this out by now because they were getting responses from some of the root and TLD name servers that might have been longer than that. However, sometimes you still find enclaves where some of this stuff is still running. And in a world of DNSSEC, you must turn off that particular set of instructions. And I think I gave all this stuff, this is just reference here on the large responses. I think I talked all about what was causing the problem there. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the flags we'll see in DNSSEC if we're actually doing DNSSEC validation. AD is sort of one of the big ones that tells us that the name server has been able to validate the record we're asking for. It has a chain of trust, and the record actually validated. DO and CD are both kind of interesting because sometimes you see them together. And it seems odd. DO means DNSSEC OK, and CD means checking disabled. It means that I don't want you to actually attempt to validate the records. There are some circumstances, though, where you may not want to validate the record, but you may want it to give you the DNSSEC information. And in fact, you will see one of those circumstances in one of our troubleshooting scenarios. Sometimes forwarders, if you're doing a forwarding name server, it will also combine them because you may have a different set of policies for things that you want to do DNSSEC validation for and things you don't want to do DNSSEC validation for. Then from your upstream server that might also be doing validation. So sometimes a forwarding name server will set both the CD flag and the DO flag. And it's important to understand kind of our terminology when we talk about whether the zone is valid, whether it's been known to be secure, or whether it's insecure, which simply means that it's like old DNS without DNSSEC. When we say a zone is insecure, what we mean is it's either not signed, or we don't have a chain of trust for it, or a trust anchor for it. So we can't know whether it's valid or not. It's just like DNS without DNSSEC. And then when we say something is actually broken or bogus, or it's a validation failure, that means that we actually tried to validate it, and the signatures didn't match, didn't work. So either somebody's trying to poison our cache, or there's been some big misconfiguration. DIG will request DNSSEC records with the plus DNSSEC flag as I showed. It will also request that checking can be disabled with the CD flag. And that's very useful when you get a cert fail and you're not sure if that cert fail is due to DNSSEC validation failures or whether it's due to some other thing that might cause a cert fail. So let's play around with something here. We're going to do this query, and you can either use that server at sns.tinker.org, or you can try sns.burnttofu.net. And I'll try it also while we're doing it. So I want the server to do DNSSEC validation. And I shouldn't have actually gotten a response. So let's try sns.tinker.org. Ah, there we go. I get a serve fail, which is what I want. I apparently haven't configured this to do validation as I expected. Okay, so I get a serve fail. And that means that there may be a problem with DNSSEC. The first thing to do in a situation like that is to use the CD flag to dig. Because then I'll know if I get an answer back, I'll know that there's something wrong with DNSSEC and not maybe something wrong with something else. Moreover, if I also include the DNSSEC flag, it'll give me the DNSSEC records, and I might be able to eyeball them and see what's wrong. So here's what we get. I get expired.tinker.org, and as the name of the domain might imply, the signature is expired. Here's the RRSig, and look at when the signature expired. It expired at May 17th of this year. Okay, so what happened is the signature validity was only about a week, only about 6 days. Somebody signed it and then forgot to re-sign it. This happens a lot. People make changes to their zone. They think, oh yeah, I've got to re-sign it, so they make changes to the zones. They re-sign it. Then the zone doesn't change for a month, but the signature validity is only for a week. So the signature expires because they're not automating their signing process. Once you start signing a zone, you have to make sure the process is automated in such a way that it signs and re-signs the zone before the signature validity interval is gone. Sometimes tools don't pick that up very well. Sometimes other things don't work. Sometimes the tool stops working but doesn't notify anyone. There's no check to see if the signature is still valid. Nagios will actually do checks now, thanks to, I think Dwayne Russell is the one who set that up, or some folks at Verisign developed some Nagios plugins, so you can actually have Nagios checking your signatures and send you an alert if the signatures get down to about 2 or 3 days before they can be re-signed. So this is an important thing to monitor, and it happens a lot. Now what I also want to show you is, and we're going to get dizzy here going through the windows. Oops. Do I even have a web browser? Let's see where it is. Okay, I want to show DNSviz, which is another great tool. This is obviously freely available tool. It's a web-based tool. This is my colleague Casey Dicio at Sandia National Lab did this. It's just to expire.tinker.org, because that whole domain is expired. Now, DNSviz takes a little bit of time. It often caches information that it has, so it doesn't take quite as long for all the queries, but sometimes it'll take a little bit of time to do what it needs to do. And it's going to give you a very nice graphical visualization of what's going on here. So you're actually going to be able to see that the signatures are expired. While we're waiting for DNSviz to look that stuff up, we'll go on to a little bit more information about what's going on here. There's another tool called DNSSEC Debugger, and we'll look at that in a minute. It's also going to show us that the signatures are expired, so it's very useful in looking at that. And let's see how they're doing here. Okay, so dnsviz has returned. And what it's given us is a very nice graphical representation, which I can actually mouse over and I can look at things. This shows me the chain of trust from the root on down. Now in this particular case, this domain tinkerdork.org does not have a DS record in the org zone, but it does have a DLV record in the DLV zone. So because my name server is validating both against DLV and against the chain of trust that appears down from the root, I'm actually going to try to validate against those DLV records. And the zone tinkerdork.org itself actually does validate. You can see it's nice and blue here. The DLV record points correctly to this DNS key record, which signs itself and also signs other DNS key records in the domain, which then signs the DS record for expired.tinkerdork.org. But then you see down here that these records are all bogus because they're in yellow, they're in red. And it gives you a very good explanation if you click over here that basically all of the signatures in this zone are expired. So it's a very quick way to figure out this is what's wrong with the particular zone. Okay, so I'm going to have it start working on the next one, which is called ID, and then we're going to go do some troubleshooting with that. This way I'll allow DNS Viz to do its thing. Okay, so if we try this one, dig plus DNSSEC id.id.tinkerdork.org. This is a different subdomain. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. Oops, I want the DNSSEC. I'm going to get rid of the CD flag for now. Okay, and again, it's given us a serve fail. Right, why did it do that? Well, let's try CD flag and let's see if it's another DNSSEC problem here. Okay, it gives me records, so it looks like it is a DNSSEC problem, because otherwise it wouldn't work at all. If there were some other problem, like the server's not authoritative or doesn't understand, it can't find an authoritative server, like some of the other problems we troubleshot earlier, it's not one of those. It's actually giving us something with signatures. The signatures appear to be good. They are valid until June 18th. I have different key numbers. I can start looking at things like the DNS keys, but there's something else that's a little bit odd. It's giving me, it actually turns out that this signature, this zone here isn't signed at all. There's no DNSSEC information for that. And the only RR SIGs I see are for the A records in tinkerdork.org. They're not actually for anything in id.tinkerdork.org. Well, okay, then let's see if there are any DS records for id.tinkerdork.org. And we'll set the DNSSEC flag again. Okay, there are no DS records. But what's wrong with this query? What is Dig telling us that we should be looking at very, very carefully there? Anyone see it? I conveniently scrolled so it's pretty much right in the middle of the screen. So, NX domain, yeah. It shouldn't say NX domain because we know that domain exists. We were actually able to find a record in it. So it shouldn't say NX domain. It should actually say no error and give us an empty answer. But instead it's saying NX domain. Okay, that's really weird. Why is it doing that? By now, DNSviz probably will be able to tell us why it's doing that. Okay, you can see a little yellow arrow down here. And you can see something that says misconfigured. It's very nice the way it says that. You're misconfigured. It's a very common misconfiguration. It was very common before the advent of DNSSEC, and hopefully it will become much less common as time goes on. What has happened here is there are no delegation records. Now remember, when you delegate the zone to another server, or even to yourself, you have to put NS records in the parent zone, and you have to put NS records in the child zone. The NS records in the parent zone point to the child zone, so it'll say id.tinkerdork.org in NS block. Then those name servers will have NS records that, again, as we saw earlier in the scenario, in the previous scenario, those records should match. What happens if you don't put NS records in a zone for a subzone, but you delegate the subzone to yourself and you have the same server serving the subzone as serve the zone? It appears to work in a world without DNSSEC. A lot of people got away with doing this. It was the wrong thing to do, but a lot of people got away with doing it. The reason for that is, I'm the name server. I load the parent zone, I load the child zone. When you ask me for something that's in the child zone, I already have it in my memory, so I'm just going to give it to you. I'm not really delegating anything at that point. The problem is with DNSSEC. If the child zone is unsigned, I have to be able to tell you that it's unsigned. Or if it is signed, I have to be able to tell you that it's signed. Now there are two problems. If I tell you that the child zone is unsigned, but the child zone exists, I will give you a no error response. If the child zone doesn't exist at all, or if I don't think it exists, I will give it an X domain response. And I can prove with DNSSEC that that domain doesn't exist because there are no records in it at all. And you can see here I have good NSEC records that basically prove that there's no domain there at all. So that's why this misconfiguration doesn't work in DNSSEC, even though you could get away with it before DNSSEC. And this is something we see a lot. In this particular case, when you see this particular situation, you tell the administrator you need to put NS records for your unsigned domains in the parent. Even if it doesn't seem like it's causing a problem, it will eventually cause a problem. And this slide explains what's going on, probably a little bit better than I did. One of the nice things about DNSviz is it lets you go directly to DNSSEC debugger for the same domain. Now this is one of the things that it looks like there are things wrong with it, but in this particular case, DNSSEC debugger can't tell the difference between this particular misconfiguration and an ordinary unsigned zone, whereas DNSviz can. Okay, DNSSEC debugger can come up with basically simple things like expired signatures and things like that, but it can't necessarily come up with this problem. So again, you may not always be able to get the same response from all of your tools, which is why you need to use a few different tools. And do you think nslookup will be able to get any of this information to you? That chance. Okay, here we have another situation where it's another unsigned zone that's the child of a signed zone. And there are intermittent problems resolving it. Sometimes it comes back bogus. Sometimes we get a serve fail when we do it. Now I don't actually have the domain, I didn't type the domain in to the slide, but you can see it as I type it in here. Okay, now this record exists, and I know that it exists. Okay, well, I actually get a response back. It's not validated because the zone isn't signed. There's no RR-sig for this record. I don't see the AD bit set anywhere in here, so I'm not validating it, but I'm still getting an answer back. So that seems to have worked. Like most intermittent problems, it's sometimes hard to stumble on it. Sometimes it'll look like everything's working. You might say to the person, I can't reproduce your problem. Okay. Again, this is where DNSviz combined with DIG can help you. So we'll go back to DNSviz and we'll start putting in this one. We'll let it go to work on that. Okay, we can try to find out if there's a similar problem to what we had before with the missing DS records. We'll try looking for let's look for NS records first and see if that's there. Okay. Oh, no, wait, the NS records are AD. Wow, they're actually signed. Okay, cool. So let's look for the NS records for sub.n.tinkerdoor.org. Okay, I have NS records. That's cool. This isn't signed. This part of the zone, there's no RR-sig here. So obviously this subzone is not signed. The administrator of the subzone didn't want it to be signed, or maybe the equipment can't handle it. Maybe it's a dynamic zone that isn't able to do auto-signing or something like that. Well, let's see what dnsviz. Let's see if it's figured out what's happened to the zone yet. So far, everything looks fine. But dnsviz is pretty smart about being able to figure out when things aren't quite fine. And there's a big red NSF record. Now, what dnsviz has actually done here is it tries to do as thorough a check as it can. It actually checks all of the authoritative name servers for a particular domain. And what it's telling me here is, this looks good, okay? If you look where it says returned by, I need to keep the cursor where it is, but if you look where it says returned by in that big blue square, you see an IP address. That's the IP address of one of the authoritative name servers for that particular domain. Now we have the big red box. A different name server is returning bogus records. These are both authoritative name servers for the domain, and they're returning bogus NSF records. So, let's try to find out what's going on here. Let's see if we can come up with some dig queries that will show us what's really going on. I've got the two name servers, they're right here. These are the two authoritative name servers that we're talking about. ns.burnttofu. And I'm going to look for DS records here. Now these two servers are both authoritative for both the parent and the child domains. So I can query them for the DS records since that's actually supposed to be in the parent. Okay, so this looks good. There are no DS records. Aren't supposed to be because it's not signed. And I get an NSEC record that covers the space between sub.n.tinkerdoor and www.n.tinkerdoor, which makes sense. I assume there's nothing beyond that. That all looks good. And let's go to the other host now. Okay, now look at the difference here. There's one thing wrong. Look at the two NSEC records. I displayed them so they're both on the screen. What do you see that's different about them?
Capitalized T.
Yeah, look, there's capitalization. There's no capitalization in this one. This one has capitalized the record. Now, some implementations have in the past, what they'll do is when they do zone transfers or when they save zones as backup files, they will effectively shorten all the records. So they'll put origin statements and then they'll shorten the records so that they are missing the fully qualified domain name. And then when they go to give the record back out, they'll requalify the domain. Okay? In some cases, what they would do is take the capitalization that was used in the configuration file as a way of requalifying and dequalifying the domain. This really did happen. And what you end up with is a change in capitalization from one of the name servers as it's giving out. This is probably a slave server in this case. So you actually get a change in capitalization as it's giving out this record. The change in capitalization does not change the signature. It's a slave server, so it's not re-signing on the fly. It's the same signature here and up here. Because it's got the same signature and the record is different, the signature fails. So we have an NSEC record that's broken on one name server and not on the other, which means every once in a while somebody's going to get a failure. Now in some cases you'll have validated resolvers will throw away records from the name server that's not working. Sometimes they won't. Okay, so basically they're going to say, I'm going to be optimistic and say if I have a valid signature from one name server, that's good enough. Sometimes they'll say, the two name servers are disagreeing with it, I'm just going to throw this away and get a server fail. So this is one of those kinds of troubleshooting things that's very hard because different implementations may do it differently, and you're going to run into the problem occasionally, but not always. And that's what's great about DNSviz, is DNSviz is going to show you all of the information you need to know, because it's going to try doing a bunch of different queries, even more than a normal implementation would do when it's trying to validate a zone. Make sure that every name server in every domain from the root on down is giving the right information. That's one of the reasons it takes a long time to provide its output. Again, we can try this on DNSSEC Debugger. DNSSEC Debugger, it just looks like, once again, it looks just like a zone that's not signed. Okay, this is the same thing. If the zone was just normally not signed, this is exactly what you find here. And it doesn't actually attempt to validate the NSEC records on multiple servers. So that's one of the reasons why you're not going to see the same output. You're not going to be able to track down where this error is coming from. What DNSSEC Debugger will give you, if we can go back far enough, our browser will not let us do that. If we go back to expired, it will show you that pretty well. Okay, so the slides now describe what we saw as we looked up those records, and they explain the problem that I just explained to you. So that was 3 scenarios of doing DNSSEC troubleshooting using DIG and DNSviz and a few other tools. And it shows how you can use a combination of the tools, the visualization tool like DNSviz, and a tool like DIG, which will actually be able to narrow down the problem that you're going to see. There will be more problems. I've given you 3 of the most common problems I've seen so far. Okay, there are going to be more. And I've also given you some of the more common non-DNSSEC problems, like the authority mismatch. The message too long problem is a problem that occurs both in DNSSEC, more likely in DNSSEC than without DNSSEC. So one problem is sort of the basic DNS problem, one problem is both, and then the other 3 problems that we dealt with are DNSSEC problems. There's a variety of tools to use in troubleshooting them. They are all available in open source and openly freely available and freely usable. And the people who are working on them are continuing to make updates. It's one of the nice things about DIG, it's actively being developed. One of the nice things about DNSviz is that Casey is listening to feedback. If you find something that is wrong with DNS, or DNSSEC, that DNSviz is not flagging, he's been able to modify it to make it start flagging those problems. So it is now able to do much more than it could do in the past. So it's very useful to be able to have these tools, and as these tools continue to be modified and continue to develop, we get more and more troubleshooting capabilities out of them. In the slides, I have a bunch of URLs to go to. I also have a list of a lot of the flags that I use here for DIG. These obviously aren't the full list. Man DIG, of course, gives you the full list of things you can do, and I encourage you to continue to play around with it. And I'm ready for questions now. This is, we have about 10 extra minutes. This is the first time I've given this tutorial. You can see not everything worked at once, but most of the stuff actually did work. I'm pretty psyched about that. Feedback is always welcome on what kinds of things can be added. Should the tutorial be move faster, move slower? Are there more basic stuff we want to do, or is there more advanced things we want to do? So I'm open to feedback. I'm open to questions. Yeah, and why don't you use the microphone for questions, and in the usual man-on etiquette, state your name and affiliation when you ask your question.
Deal with Sinatra. Don't quad A records also work for IPv6?
Yeah, quad A records are used for IPv6. So if you saw, the only time we saw quad A records in RR6, we saw them in NSEC records, we saw them in RR6. the purpose of a quad A record is to provide an IPv6 address for a domain name. Because IPv6 addresses are longer, also, if you have a bunch of authority records, a bunch of name servers that have a bunch of quad A records attached to them, and you give out that information in the additional section, that also makes it more likely that you're going to have a response that's going to go over 512 bytes. So the increasing prevalence of IPv6 is going to make the large response problem even more prevalent. And that's especially true in TLDs and ccTLDs, where they tend to have a lot of name servers. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Sorry. My name is Dennis with Link Technologies. The question is, are you seeing a lot of caching DNS servers have problems with the long DNS queries?
For the most part, caching DNS servers themselves don't have problems. It is usually because there are firewalls that are attached to those caching DNS servers, or host-based firewalls on those DNS servers, or firewalls somewhere else that are either preventing UDP fragments, that's usually the biggest one, or they're preventing DNS responses larger than 512 bytes without TCP. They're not allowing TCP. And one of the things that is interesting here is that the standard, the DNSSEC standard, requires the use of eDNS. So what it means is you have to be able to use the eDNS option to specify response sizes that are larger than 512 bytes all the way up to 64K. You can specify something much smaller. Usually 4K is the normal response size. So what that means is that servers in that situation will tend not to try to do TCP. They will instead fragment UDP. So you're doing a conversation between a caching server and an authoritative server, and it sends you back a bunch of UDP fragments. You have a situation where sometimes that authoritative server can't get those UDP fragments. Now, bind, as an example, automatically starts to step down its eDNS buffer. So it'll retry the query with sufficiently lower eDNS buffers. And at that point, once it gets a low enough eDNS buffer that the query becomes truncated, then it'll fall back to TCP. So later versions of bind will actually log when they're doing that. If you have logging set up correctly, it'll say that I was able to resolve this name after I set the eDNS buffer down to 1024 bytes or down to 512 bytes. Which means that somewhere in between, somebody was either blocking UDP fragments, or the server, or something in between the server and the client, or the recursive server and the caching server, were either blocking UDP fragments, they were doing inspection of the DNS messages, were blocking DNS messages, or the server just doesn't support, the authoritative server just doesn't support eDNS, which it should, but it's just not supporting eDNS 0. Right. The point that he was making was that there are other servers that are hard-coded to not accept anything more than 512 bytes. The other thing that's really interesting in this is not a DNS server, it's QMail. When QMail was first written, it's a mail server, not DNS server, but when it was first written, it would not accept DNS responses larger than 512 bytes, regardless of how it got them. UDP fragments, TCP, doesn't matter. It won't take it. But here's the thing, it also does any queries. Because mail servers will often try to canonicalize the domain name of the recipient, if you look up a recipient's domain name and you find a CNAME record, then you look up the A record and you try to canonicalize the name that way. QMail tried to take a shortcut and just do an any query and try to figure out what all the records were that it was supposed to look for, whether it was supposed to look for MX records, A records, or CNAME. Whatever it would see, then it would try to do the right thing. The problem with doing that is that it now receives, again, Microsoft.com, PayPal.com, even when they're not DNSSEC signed, but especially when they are, it will throw away those responses and just say, I can't do hostname lookup code, I can't send this mail. So when I started signing Berkeley EDU some, about 2 years ago, I found that people very quickly, I was able to fish out all the old QMail servers that were out there that people were trying to send to UC Berkeley. Now luckily there's already an FAQ about this and there's a patch set for QMail. QMail's not under active development anymore, so it really shouldn't be being used anymore. But there's a patch set which will fix this particular problem. But this is an example of an application now which is not accepting a DNS response over 512 bytes. And you have to patch it just to get it to do that. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks a lot for coming.